On this Thursday night, Ontario's alarming rise in measles cases.
This is not an easy outbreak to manage.
Where else the virus is spreading, and the message from health officials. Breaking news, the new reprieve for Canada's auto industry hours before it was set to get slapped with more tariffs. Bidding on bits of the Hudsons Bay company. What's up for grabs, the interested buyers, and the battle over historic artifacts.
It is wrong to auction off sacred objects.
Plus, Canada's critical role in liberating the Netherlands from the Nazis.
It is the biggest outlay we have ever had on a field of battle anywhere in our history.
The thousands who made the ultimate sacrifice 80 years ago.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin with a concerning rise in measles cases across the country. Today, Ontario reported its highest increase since an outbreak began late last year. There were 223 new infections in the province over the past week, bringing the total to more than 1,200 since October. Dozens of people have been hospitalized, the majority of them children. Global's Katherine Ward joins us. Katherine, what are health authorities saying?
Colleen, I spoke with Public Health Ontario earlier today, and the word they chose to describe these new numbers was startling. In 1 week, the measles case count increased by 223 infections, where it had been averaging about 100 new cases a week for some time. Most of these new infections are happening in the southern part of the province, where the outbreak is most concentrated. They are predominantly occurring in people who are unvaccinated or under-vaccinated, meaning they have only had one of the 2 recommended doses of the measles vaccine. Dr. Sarah Wilson says the big focus for public health units is getting people to roll up their sleeves, but that will take some time.
This is not an easy outbreak to manage. I think we're seeing that in many parts of North America. We see, substantial transmission in many parts of, many parts of the U.S., Canada, Mexico, related to pockets of unimmunized and under-immunized communities. And we know that many of those communities, some of these communities, it's going to take some time in terms of local public health units building trust in, vaccination, trust in the work of public health.
And Katherine, measles cases are rising in other parts of the country too.
Yes, more cases are popping up in Alberta, where 193 infections are now on the record. And other provinces, including BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, are seeing increasing numbers as well. But the bigger picture here to keep in mind is that measles outbreaks like this have not been seen in nearly 30 years since Canada achieved elimination status for the disease. Given the significant and sustained transmission happening across Canada, there are growing concerns our country could lose that designation if the outbreaks are not brought under control by the fall. Colleen?
Katherine Ward in Toronto. Thanks, Katherine. When it comes to mental health, fewer children and youth are ending up in the emergency room or hospitalized, according to the Canadian Institute for Health Information. A new report says ER rates declined 31% over the past 5 years for those aged 5 to 24. Doctor visits were up 8%, suggesting people turn to their primary care providers for treatment. There was also an 18% increase in prescriptions for mood and anxiety medications. Quebec is moving ahead with a full cell phone ban in all schools in the coming school year. Like much of the country, cell phones had already been banned in Quebec classrooms. The new measures will extend that policy, meaning cell phones and other electronic devices will not be allowed during the school day, including during any breaks. They also won't be permitted on school grounds. There is news tonight that U.S. Customs and Border Protection says Canadian auto parts that follow North American free trade agreements will not be subject to new import tariffs. The head of Canada's Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association says other auto parts will face a 25% tariff May 3rd. We've seen 11th-hour adjustments to President Donald Trump's tariffs before, and exactly how these tariffs will be implemented is likely to be on the agenda when Prime Minister Mark Carney travels to Washington soon. Mackenzie Gray reports.
Well, I think you heard today.
It's the latest flattery of Mark Carney, this time on Fox News.
I think the new Prime Minister is a serious person. It's not the same experience we had with the old Canadian Prime Minister.
Coming from a quiet but important member of the Trump administration, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, who's kept a low profile compared to other Trump officials. But he'll play a key role in negotiating the economic and security agreements that Carney has promised to broker.
The president very much wants to have a healthy relationship in North America. We should have more manufacturing in North America. We need to have it in our hemisphere.
An encouraging sign for Canadian manufacturing, but contradicting a routine talking point of the president.
We certainly don't want their automobiles. They make a lot of, millions of automobiles are sent in. I'd rather have them made in Michigan.
Add that to the long list of irritants the American administration has with Canada, including Google having to pay into the Canadian News Fund and the digital services tax, which will hit tech giants starting June 30th. The Prime Minister has been mum on what he'd be willing to negotiate on, except for one key sector.
We will never have discussions with respect to supply management. It's off the table.
It's not just international negotiations Carney needs to undertake. He's promised to remove all internal trade barriers by Canada Day, dealing with some prickly provinces.
What Albertans and Canadians voted for was for Canada to become an economic superpower. And that means also an energy superpower. And that is what I would fully expect Mark Carney to do.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith hoping Carney will work with the Conservatives in the minority parliament, instead of with the NDP and Bloc, who she called fringe voices. But the prospect of the government falling in the short term is very limited.
This is probably not the time to be bringing forward non-confidence votes and triggering a second election this year.
Parliamentary manoeuvring just got a bit harder for Carney, with Elections Canada informing the Bloc Québécois they won the suburban Montreal riding of Terrebonne from the Liberals by 44 votes. A race so close, Colleen, it will require a judicial recount. But for the time being, Carney is now 4 seats short of a majority.
Mackenzie, 24 Sussex Drive should be the Prime Minister's official residence, but I understand that's still not an option.
No, it certainly isn't, Colleen, because despite it being prime real estate here in Ottawa, overlooking the Ottawa River, it's in total disrepair. Mold, asbestos, and lead are all over the building. And after Justin Trudeau declined to live there in 2015 after winning the election, new tenants moved in. Rodents, that was pretty gross, but that is leading Mark Carney to follow through in Trudeau's footsteps and soon move into Rideau Cottage. Folks will remember that from Trudeau's COVID press conferences. But Carney could actually become the person who solves the 24 Sussex problem after one of Justin Trudeau's final acts as PM was to order an advisory committee to determine what to do with the Prime Minister's residence, Colleen. And whatever decision gets made, it likely won't be a cheap one, with official estimates in the tens of millions of dollars.
Oof. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. U.S. President Donald Trump has ousted his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, in the first major shakeup of his inner circle this term. It comes just weeks after it was revealed Waltz added a journalist to a signal chat being used to discuss military plans. Jeff Semple has more.
Mike Waltz arrived at the White House for what would be his final day as national security advisor, the first casualty of the second Trump administration.
It was the most expected thing so far in the Trump administration, and not much has been expected.
A highly decorated military veteran, Waltz had been widely blamed for Signalgate, the scandal in March when Waltz accidentally added a journalist into a chat group where senior White House officials shared secret details about a military strike on Yemen.
Sloppy, careless, incompetent.
But at the time, the president defended Waltz.
That man is a very good man.
1 month later, Trump now announcing he's nominating Waltz for UN ambassador.
Trump didn't want to be seen as sort of giving a scalp to the media sort of immediately after that happened.
This political analyst says Waltz had also pushed for a more hawkish foreign policy, including tougher sanctions against Russia.
And so, to the extent that you're removing someone who's more of a Russia skeptic, maybe that makes it even likelier that Trump would continue to show deference to Russia.
Waltz's tenure, just 100 days, seems long compared to the unprecedented turnover during Trump's first term, when dozens of senior officials were fired or forced to resign, including Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, after just 24 days, and Anthony Scaramucci's infamously short 10-day stint as communications director.
They started measuring them in Scaramucci's in that term.
Long before he became president, Trump was famous for his firings.
But Rod, you're fired.
That fewer staff have been turfed this term is perhaps because Trump handpicked his team of loyalists.
We have a cabinet of yes men and toadies. There are no guardrails on Donald Trump in term 2, and it is a dangerous thing for the United States and for the world.
Trump announced Marco Rubio will serve as the new national security advisor. That means Rubio now holds 4 government positions, including Secretary of State, as Trump's inner circle grows smaller. Colleen?
Jeff Semple in Washington. Thanks, Jeff. A series of deadly drone attacks in Ukraine today, a day after the country struck a long-awaited minerals deal with the U.S. Russian drones hit residential buildings, a school, and a supermarket in Odessa. 2 people were killed, 15 others were injured. And in the Russian-controlled Kherson region of Ukraine, 7 people were killed as Ukraine hit Russian targets there. The signing of a natural resources deal between Ukraine and the U.S. would give Washington preferential access to mineral deposits, oil, and natural gas in the war-torn country. The agreement does not include any concrete security guarantees, but Kyiv hopes it will pave the way for future U.S. military support. And as Redmond Shannon explains, analysts say the deal is far better for Ukraine than previous drafts.
Months in the making, it's a deal both sides say is in their best interests.
We saw yet again why President Trump is our deal maker in chief.
The US-Ukraine agreement on natural resources will establish a reconstruction fund for the country battered by war.
This partnership establishes a fund that will receive 50% of royalties, license fees, and other similar payments from natural resource projects in Ukraine.
The US will get access to critical minerals as well as oil and natural gas. One key aspect is that the revenue will not be used to pay off past US military aid grants, as had been previously proposed.
The Ukrainians were ready to walk if need be. If the choices were, in Zelensky's words, saddling 10 generations of Ukrainians with debt.
After signing the deal, Ukraine's economy minister said the United States may also provide new assistance, for example, air defense systems for Ukraine. Given US President Donald Trump's policy of stopping war aid, that is far from certain. The deal also does not include any future security guarantees.
This deal is many things, but this is not a peace deal. This is not a deal that's going to get Russia to stop bombing Ukraine.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
However, it is a far cry from 2 months ago.
Gambling with World War III.
When Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was told to leave the White House without signing that earlier draft of the deal. A turning point, perhaps, their remarkable meeting at Pope Francis's funeral. Zelensky called the deal the first result of that Vatican meeting. Ukraine's parliament still needs to approve the agreement. That's expected in the next few weeks. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Bay Day for the highest bidder. Coming up, who put in offers as Canada's oldest retailer hit the auction block. And Dachshund Dash, the wiener dog wonderland in Hungary. An auction of what's left of Canada's most historic retailer has ended. Hudsons Bay won't confirm how many offers it received by last night's court-imposed deadline, but there are several buyers interested in different pieces of the business. Heidi Petracek reports on who's made a bid, what they're hoping to buy, and the uncertain fate for some of the company's historic artifacts.
As the sun starts to set on the iconic retailer, investors are making moves to buy what's left of Hudsons Bay.
I'd like to see parts of the bay saved. I think it's a piece of Canadian history.
It's part of all of us.
Companies interested in picking up pieces of the historic corporation had to submit bids by end of business Wednesday. Among them, a Toronto-based investment firm.
As long as it all stays in Canada, that's my main concern.
What Caldwell's after isn't the Bay's physical stores, but its intellectual property, like its logo and those world-renowned stripes.
I've seen the Hudsons Bay Company brand depreciated too much over the years. We want to reverse that trend and make it back to a trading organization that it really is, always has been.
He's not alone. Canadian press reports another national icon, Canadian Tire, is vying for the same thing. although the company didn't respond to our inquiries by deadline.
If you're Canadian Tire, you're thinking, can we buy these brands at a reasonable price and then use them to either build stores within our stores or launch, new chains?
Then there's the BC-based Chinese billionaire behind 3 Western shopping malls. Wei Honglu confirmed to the Toronto Star, quote, money has already been paid, referring to the deposit on her bid to buy 25 Bay stores.
She would have to retool and look at merchandising, look at suppliers. She would also have to explore warehouses and infrastructure.
But the Bay is more than just a store. It's also part of Canadian history, formed more than 300 years ago as a fur trading company. That means the Bay has more than 4,000 historical artifacts. The courts gave the go-ahead to auction them all off. But many are Indigenous, and First Nations leaders want those items back.
Because some may have a significant historical and cultural value to First Nations across Canada.
It is wrong to auction off sacred objects.
The retailer's long history, now part of the long legal process of being dismantled piece by piece. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
May Day demonstrations turned violent between police and protesters in Paris. Similar scenes played out in the Philippines and Turkey, where more than 400 arrests have been reported. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets around the world to mark International Workers' Day. Demonstrators focused on pushing for better labor protections, many united in their anger towards U.S. President Donald Trump and his policies that have fueled fears of global economic instability. Ahead, from the silly to the sublime, Canadian wins, losses, and who's hanging on. If you need a good dose of dachshunds, check this out. Hundreds of wiener dogs and their owners strutted their stuff to set Hungary's record for the largest single-breed dog walk. About 500 pooches turned out for a stroll in the sun, just shy of the 897 needed for the Guinness World Record. To the NHL now, the Montreal Canadiens season came to a bittersweet end last night after losing their first-round playoff series to the Washington Capitals. The Habs lost in 5 games, but they have a bright future as one of the league's youngest teams. As for the other Canadian playoff teams, Winnipeg took a 3-2 series lead yesterday against St. Louis. And tonight, Toronto will try for a 3rd time to knock out Ottawa in the Battle of Ontario, while Edmonton can move on to the next round with a win over Los Angeles. For fans of the beautiful game, it was a beautiful night for the Vancouver Whitecaps in Florida. They beat Lionel Messi's team 3-1 in the second leg of their semifinal, securing a spot in the CONCACAF Champions Cup final. They'll play the best team from Mexico next month. Next, honoring the brave Canadians who liberated the Netherlands 80 years ago. It's an important week in the Netherlands, and Canada's a big part of it. 80 years ago, Canadian soldiers helped liberate the Dutch from Nazi occupation. That freedom and Canada's pivotal role are being honored with ceremonies that reflect a powerful bond between the two countries. Mike Armstrong is in the Netherlands to cover this week's events. Mike.
Well, Colleen, this is the largest of 3 Canadian war cemeteries in the Netherlands. We're just outside the town of Roosbeek in the eastern part of the country. The German border is actually just 2.5 kilometers in that direction. This is the final resting place of 2,310 fallen Canadian soldiers. Their sacrifice will be remembered in a special ceremony here Friday, one of dozens and dozens of events that will be held across the country in the coming days. The Dutch are looking back at a painful chapter in their history. The Nazis rolled into the Netherlands in May of 1940 and occupied the country for 5 brutal years. More than 200,000 people were killed. About half were Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Others were civilians killed in bombings, executions, and famine.
Over the border, and our transport never paused.
It was primarily Canadian troops that swept north through the Netherlands in 1944 and 45, eventually forcing the German occupiers out. Close to 100,000 Canadians took part. Military historian David O'Keefe.
We have about 90% of Canada's army all in Holland by the end of the war.
It is the biggest outlay we have ever had on a field of battle anywhere in our history.
Now, the last several months of the occupation are referred to as the Hunger Winter. Nazi forces cut off food and fuel to parts of the country, and about 20,000 Dutch died of starvation.
Soon grist will come to the mill.
When Canadian troops helped liberate and then feed the country, the next few months, happy ones got a new name. The Dutch came to call it the Canadian Summer.
At the unloading point, food is quickly unshipped.
When the Canadians arrived, it was kind of a double barrel thing. In other words, they liberated them from the tyranny of Nazi Germany, but more importantly, they liberated them from hunger, the very basic of human necessity, and that's what we brought them. It really was Canada's finest hour.
Welcome to the Netherlands.
Well, some of the people who were part of that finest hour are here again. The Canadian government has brought 23 veterans of the Second World War to the Netherlands, all right around 100 years old. They arrived at their hotel Thursday afternoon in Apeldoorn, a city Canadians liberated on April 17th, 1945.
Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here. It's a very special moment to welcome them here. It's very special not only for me, for Apeldoorn, but for the whole country.
Over the next few days, we're going to look at how the liberation is being remembered by the people of this country, by the many Canadians who've come to visit, and by those veterans who've come back. We're actually going to get to speak to them on Saturday. Looking forward to that. Colleen?
Mike Armstrong in Groesbeck, Netherlands. Thanks, Mike. Tomorrow on Global National, Mike speaks to the Dutch woman running a project that shares the photos and life stories of fallen Canadian soldiers buried in Groesbeck. And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Colleen Christie. We're going to stay in Groesbeck for tonight's Your Canada. It's the grave of Private Antonio Gauthier, one of the Canadian soldiers killed liberating the Netherlands. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a good night.